Close your eyes for a second. Picture the single worst thing that ever happened to you. The loss that still tightens your chest. The regret you whisper about at night. Now imagine someone asks you calmly, could you love that moment exactly as it happened? Not tolerate it. Not pretend it didn't sting. Could you actually say yes to it as part of the story that made you who you are? If that idea feels outrageous, you're in the right place. That outrage is the doorway. Nietzsche called the attitude on the other side Amor Fati, the love of fate. He didn't mean passive acceptance or cheerfully smiling while everything collapses. He meant something sharper, a willingness to say yes to life's whole script, including the ugly pages, because loving that script is the only honest way to write the next chapter ourselves. This is not a spiritual bypass. It's not telling yourself to be positive when you feel broken. It's a disciplined stance that changes how you use your pain. It shifts you from asking, "Why did this happen to me?" to asking, "What can I make of this?" That shift, small as it sounds, rewires what suffering does inside you. Instead of shrinking you, it becomes raw material for growth. You probably have questions already. Isn't love of fate the same as fatalism? Doesn't loving your fate mean giving up control? Not at all. Nietzsche was furious with resignation. He wanted passion, craft, and hard honesty. Amor Fati asks you to own what happened, then take artistic responsibility for what you will do with it. It's both acceptance and creation at once. Why does this matter now? Because we live in a culture that treats discomfort like a problem to erase. We are trained to chase certainty, avoid hard feelings, and edit our lives into highlight reels. That strategy leaves us brittle. When something real and painful arrives, illness, betrayal, the death of a plan, our first reflex is panic or blame. Amor Fati trains a different reflex: to meet reality fully, then shape a life from it that we can love, even if only imperfectly. Here's a small experiment you can do while you listen. Pick one small sting from last week: an awkward email, a moment you froze in a conversation, a missed opportunity. Name it, quietly. Take one deep breath. Now ask, what did that moment teach me about my limits, my wants, or my values? Don't judge the answer. Notice it. You just made the first move toward loving the fact that it happened. That move costs nothing but attention. It starts to change things. To understand Amor Fati, we need to see how Nietzsche makes it different from older ideas about fate. Traditional fate often feels like an iron rod fixed in the sky. Events happen to you, you're carried along. Free will, on the other hand, tries to make you the sole architect of your life. Nietzsche refuses both extremes. He says, life gives you circumstances you didn't choose. Your power lies in how you respond, how you shape meaning from them. Loving fate is the radical act of saying yes to your life while refusing to be its victim. That is why Nietzsche ties Amor Fati to the thought experiment he calls the eternal recurrence. Imagine your life, every joy, every loss, every boring commute repeats forever, exactly the same. Would you curse that life? Or would you say yes to it in full? If the thought freezes you, you have work to do. If it thrills you, you are practicing Amor Fati already. The test is blunt, but useful. It asks you to measure how much you would affirm your life as a whole, not just the parts you prefer. This is practical, not mystical. Loving fate sharpens choices. When you accept that some things are given aging, accidents, other people's freedom to hurt you, you stop wasting energy on complaints that change nothing. That redirected energy can go into acts that do change things: creating, repairing, loving, practicing craft. Amor Fati teaches a discipline of attention and redirection. Yet saying yes to fate is hard because we carry a shadow inside us, a set of unexamined grudges, denied shame, secret desires. Jung taught that the unconscious pushes whatever it cannot accept onto the world. You blame others for your pain because you haven't named the part of you that resists. Amor Fati forces you to look into that dark room. It asks, what in me resists this event? What story am I telling to avoid recognizing a truth about myself? Facing those answers dissolves projection and returns power to you. So how do you practice this without becoming brittle or self-blaming? Start with small, steady habits. The simplest is morning reflection. Before your phone and the headlines, take 2 minutes and ask, what is today likely to bring that I will not like? Imagine it, briefly. Then imagine making one small, honest choice in response. This is not pessimism. It is preparation. The Stoics called this negative visualization. Nietzsche would call it honesty. It trains you to meet trouble with readiness rather than surprise. Another practical tool is restorying. Trauma and failure leave loose threads in your narrative. If you leave those threads untended, they tangle and trip you. Restorying is a gentle rewrite. You look at an event, see the raw facts, and then notice the meanings you have layered on top. Are they true? Are they useful? Then you try a different meaning that grants you agency, not false optimism, a meaning that respects pain but also names a path forward. That betrayal showed me where my boundaries were weak. We also need emotional calibration. Accepting does not mean numbing. Nietzsche loved life partly because he felt deeply joy and pain were both vivid. Amor Fati asks you to keep feeling, but to feel with wider eyes. When grief arrives, feel it fully. Name it, mourn it, but also look for any honest gift it offers. Sharper clarity, new tenderness, a cleaner sense of what matters. Over time, feeling becomes less like a trap and more like information. Here is a truth that helps. Loving fate is not passive. It is not a mood you wait for. It is a skill you practice. Like learning a language, you start clumsy, then later you can speak with a fluent ease. The practice combines 3 movements. First, the recognition of what is the raw fact. Second, the refusal to lie about it, no sugarcoating, no false consolation. Third, the creative response. What can I do with what I now have? That third movement is the will to power in Nietzsche's language, but not the power over others. Power to create meaning, to make form from chaos. People worry Amor Fati will make them accept injustice or cruelty. It doesn't. Loving fate does not mean endorsing harm. It means you refuse to let harm define your whole life story. You can fight injustice fiercely and still love the fact that fighting is now part of your life's work. In fact, loving your fate can give you steadier courage to oppose wrongs, because your will is not fueled by reactive outrage alone, but by a broader affirmation of your purpose. If you feel resistance now, that resistance is a signpost, not a failure. Resistance hides valuable information. Ask, what am I afraid of losing if I accept this? Often the answer points to an identity that needs reshaping. If your identity depends on never failing, forgiving a failure becomes a work of art. If your identity depends on being right, accepting a painful truth can feel like death. Amor Fati asks you to let parts of that old self die, so a larger, truer self can live. One of the most freeing practices is to tell your life as a story you would choose to read. When you prepare for sleep, narrate your day in one sentence that includes the hard part and ends with some grain of meaning. I missed the deadline, but I saw where my system is weak and I will fix it. These small sentences do something subtle. They train your brain to look for meaning even in small losses. Over months, your sense of having a life worth loving deepens. You are not alone in this work. Every tradition that teaches resilience uses community, and so should you. Talk about your attempts to love your fate with a friend who can respond without giving empty cheer. Join a small group where people share the hardest parts of their week and what they tried to love about them. Speech refines thought. The moment you say, "This hurt me, and here is one thing it taught me," you turn private pain into public wisdom. In the next part, we will do something practical and a little daring. A guided sequence that will take you toward a 28-minute experience of this stance. We will use a brief test Nietzsche imagined, some journaling, and a focused intention to turn a particular wound into the basis of a new project. For now, hold one sentence. My life, whole and messy, can be loved and used. Try saying it out loud. Feel the plain fact settle. That small sentence is the seed. Let it sit. It will grow if you pay it steady attention. Listen closely for this. The hardest thing about loving your fate is that it asks you to love the very parts of your life you would normally hide. It asks you to love the scare, the scar, the mistake, the awkward silence. That demand hits like cold water. And if you survive that splash, something clarifying happens. You stop pretending your life is a highlight reel. You get real. You gain room to act. To make this usable, we need to dig into 3 connected ideas, then turn them into a practice you can use. First, Nietzsche's core test, the eternal recurrence. Second, the active energy he calls the will to power. Third, the psychological work, shadow integration that makes those ideas sustainable. Together, they turn a fierce phrase into a steady skill. Start with the thought experiment. Imagine precisely that your life, every choice, every joy, every failure will return to you again and again forever. Not in some vague sense. Exactly. The same arguments, the same pain, the same small mercies. Would you curse your life or bless it? If you would curse it, that tells you something brutal. You are living a life you secretly despise. If you would bless it, then you are already practicing Amor Fati in a deep way. Why does Nietzsche ask this? Because ordinary acceptance can hide cowardice. You can accept when you are beaten into silence. You can bow when you are resigned. The eternal recurrence is a fire test. It forces you to face whether your life would be worth reliving without any edits. It exposes passive resignation. It exposes grudges. It places responsibility back in your hands. Will you arrange your life so that a future, eternal you could love it? That responsibility leads directly to the second idea, will to power. Nietzsche's phrase gets misread as mere domination. Don't fall for that. Will to power is creative force. It is the urge to transform what is given into something more alive. It's not about controlling other people. It's about shaping your stance toward events. When suffering arrives, the will to power makes a choice. Either be flattened or use the pressure to forge new strength. Amor Fati and will to power are partners. Love what happens. Then use it. Here's an image that helps. Think of a blacksmith and a broken piece of iron. Fate hands the smith a bent, cracked bar. The smith can throw it away, or the smith can hammer it, quench it, fold it, and make it into a blade. Amor Fati is the smith's love of the broken bar. Will to power is the hammer. One without the other is useless. Loving fate without action becomes passive piety. Action without love becomes blind force. Now the inner work. Nietzsche points outward. He wants you to love the world. Jung points inward. He tells us we must meet the parts of ourselves we hide. That hidden part your shadow stores the raw material that fuels either bitterness or creative power. If you never name the anger, the shame, the envy, you will project it. You will see the trait in others and call it fate. You will blame the world and live small. Shadow work looks simple on paper and feels dangerous in practice. You begin by noticing the small reactions that feel too big. A comment that lights you up with rage. A memory that collapses your confidence. Those reactions are signposts. They point to a truth you refuse to look at. Name it. Journal about it. Ask what the feeling wants you to know. Is it protection? Is it a story about worth? Say the truth out loud. I felt shame when my father left. Or, I felt small when I failed. That simple naming reduces the power of projection. It clears the space for Amor Fati. Let me give you a concrete example. A client, let's call her Maya, felt furious every time her boss criticized her. She lived thinking the world was unfair. Shadow work asked a plain question. Where else in your life do you fear not being good enough? She realized she had internalized a childhood voice that equated mistakes with rejection. She saw that the fury was less about the boss and more about her old fear. With that insight, she changed her response. She still felt angry, but she no longer believed the anger defined the situation. She used the moment to ask for clarity and then to adjust her work. The event became fuel, not a prison. This pattern scales. When you accept the hard facts of your life, then meet the shadow that makes you resist those facts, you are ready to act creatively. You stop being a passive reactor. You craft. But how do you move from insight to steady habit? Here are 3 practices that deepen Amor Fati into muscle memory. Each is short, practical, and repeatable. These practices are small. That's the point. Big vows fail. Tiny, repeated moves build a new orientation. The way muscles grow is not by one heroic lift, but by steady reps. Here's a practical litmus test. In the next week, pick one small setback. Observe your immediate reaction. If your first move is to blame and ruminate, stop. Take one breath. Ask, what part of me is hurt? Name it. Then ask, what one constructive move could I take? Do it. This chain notice, name, act is the active spine of Amor Fati. It trains the mind to move from being stuck to shaping realities. There's an inner rhythm to this work that matters. It begins with curiosity. Curiosity reduces moral panic. Curiosity opens you to the shape of the fact. Then honesty. Honesty turns off self-deception. Then creativity. Creativity is the will to power in practice. You do not invent false optimism. You invent new forms of life that make suffering useful. Finally, remember the long view. Nietzsche's ideal is not a one-time conversion. It is a lifetime of revaluation. You will have days when old wounds flare, and you will fail. That is part of the path. Failure is not a verdict. It is evidence. Amor Fati does not promise smoothness. It promises a different relation to suffering, one that lets suffering be a teacher, not a jailer. There is a practical moment waiting inside every idea. We have unpacked Nietzsche's challenge, felt the sting of the eternal recurrence, met the smith's hammer of the will to power, and learned how to meet the shadow without being consumed by it. Now the question is simple. How do you live this every day? How does Amor Fati stop being an impressive phrase and become a steady way you handle morning emails, family fights, and the slow grind of growth? Begin with a sharp, honest observation. Most people use either resistance or avoidance when life hurts. Resistance looks like rage, blame, or endless rumination. Avoidance looks like distraction, numbing, or the fantasy that you can make pain disappear. Amor Fati asks for a third route. Meet the fact, then move. That meeting is short and precise. It is not an hour-long therapy session every time you are hurt. It is a 5-step practice you can use in real time. I'll lay it out and then show how to build it into a life plan. Try that sequence in the next stressful moment. Do it slowly. It feels odd at first. It feels too simple. That is the power of ritual. Small actions repeated become muscle. Now, go beyond single moments. Build a 30-day experiment around 3 practices. The experiment is your laboratory. You are testing whether Amor Fati can shift your automatic responses. These practices build a discipline that is not stoic numbness and not toxic positivity. It combines stoic readiness, Nietzschean affirmation, and Jungian integration. You prepare for trouble, you use it, and you understand how it lives in you. Now, measurement. You need signals that show the practice works. Don't chase vague feeling better. Look for behaviors and small shifts that matter. Community accelerates this work. Philosophy alone can become sterile. The deepest changes come with conversation. Find 3 people and form a practical circle. Here's a format that works. Every week, one person offers a short wound story. Factual, 2 minutes. Then 10 minutes of hearing. No advice, just questions that help clarify. Then, 10 minutes of action planning. Rotate the role. This structure trains listening without fixing and planning without avoidance. When others mirror your shadow without judgment, you learn to hold yourself. Another social experiment. A shared 7-day challenge of negative visualization. Each day, participants write 1 brief facing of fear and 1 preparation step. Sharing shows variety. Your fear is not unique, and your preparation may help someone else. Shared challenges normalize discomfort and make practice social. Now, let's address hard edges. What if your environment is toxic? What if there is abuse or systemic harm? Amor Fati does not ask you to love oppression. It asks you to take the facts and then act to change what can be changed. Loving your fate does not mean staying in a burning house. It means using the fact of the burn to fuel the craft of leaving and rebuilding. Loving your fate is compatible with boundary setting, legal action, and exit strategies. In fact, your clarity about what you love and what you must oppose sharpens action. What about grief that refuses small practices? There are forms of trauma that need therapy, time, and companions. Amor Fati, in that context, is gentle. Start smaller. Meet the days. 1 breath, 1 sentence, 1 tiny step. The philosophy is helpful as a companion to therapy, not a replacement. Use it respectfully. At this point, you may wonder, what is the payoff? Why choose this path when easier escapes exist? There are 3 payoffs that matter. Before we close, let me give you a 90-day plan that holds the practices, the measurements, and the social support together. This is a simple scaffold. Phase 1, weeks 1-4. Habit foundation. Do morning negative visualization and evening mini journal. Time your reaction in daily notes. Find 1 friend and share your first weekly check-in. Phase 2, weeks 5-8. Deepen and integrate. Add 1 weekly 28-minute ritual focused on a persistent wound. Begin shadow journaling. Once a week, write what triggered you and what old story it echoes. Share 1 insight with your circle. Phase 3, weeks 9-12. Scale and test. Add a public tiny experiment, a small challenge you post about, like, I will say no to X every time it comes up, and log outcomes. Review your 30-day ledger. Note changes in reaction times, attempts, and narrative tone. Decide on one structural change boundary, routine, new project to implement based on those lessons. At the end of 90 days, read your journal from day one. Notice the difference in the sentences you write. If you have done the work honestly, your journal will show fewer catastrophes and more construction. This is the practical evidence of Amor Fati transforming from idea to skill. So here is your immediate, doable plan. Tonight, pick one small regret or pain. Use the 5-step sequence: fact, feeling, shadow question, creative step, useful meaning. Write one sentence that honors the fact and names one tiny action. Do that quietly. It takes 5 minutes. Then sleep. If you do this over and over, you build a life you can face without flinching. You build a life you can love without lying. That is what Amor Fati asks. Not a single heroic transformation, but a daily fidelity to making what is into something you can love. If you leave this conversation with only one line, take this: love your fate enough to use it. Use what happened to make something sturdy, beautiful, true. That is the deepest freedom you can practice.